Long before there was an empire, long before the major contracts, long before his name carried weight in boardrooms and industry circles, there was just one man, one idea, and a level of determination that's becoming harder and harder to find. He wasn't born into wealth. He didn't inherit a company. He didn't have investors lining up to fund his vision. Everything he built started from nothing. While most people waited for opportunities to appear, he learned how to create them. While others gave up when things got difficult, he kept moving forward, even without guarantees, even without support, even without knowing whether any of it would actually pay off. The early years were brutal. There were months when simply paying the bills felt like a victory. Months when losing a single client could put the entire business at risk. Moments when walking away seemed far more reasonable than continuing the fight. But he never quit. Because in his mind, he wasn't just building a company, he was building freedom. He was building a future, he was building a legacy. And slowly the hard work began to pay off. First came the small clients, then the larger contracts, then something even more valuable, a reputation. People began associating his name with reliability. With integrity, with results, the company grew. New employees joined the team. New markets opened up. New opportunities appeared. And for the first time, he realized he had built something truly significant, something worth protecting. But success brought a challenge he hadn't fully anticipated. The larger the company became, the harder it was to manage everything alone. The opportunities multiplied, the demands multiplied, the responsibilities multiplied. Every new level of growth required more time, more attention, and more leadership. And without realizing it, he began considering something he had avoided for most of his career, bringing someone in to share the burden, someone he could trust, someone who could help take the business to the next level, someone who could help turn years of hard-earned success into something even bigger. And it was at that exact moment that the wrong person entered his life. He came into the picture at exactly the right time, or at least that's what the CEO believed. At that point, the company was experiencing the most exciting period in its history. New clients were coming in constantly. Major contracts were being signed. New markets were opening up, and growth was accelerating faster than ever before. But success brings its own set of challenges. For the first time in years, the CEO felt like he couldn't be everywhere at once. The business was expanding, the opportunities were multiplying, and the weight of leadership was becoming heavier with every passing month. That's when this man appeared. Introduced through mutual contacts, backed by an impressive resume. Experienced. Polished, well-connected. The kind of person who seemed to have exactly the skills the company needed. From the very first meetings, he made a strong impression. He understood the industry. He offered smart solutions. He spoke with confidence. And perhaps, most importantly, he appeared to see the business exactly the way the CEO did. Their conversations became more frequent. The ideas became bigger. And with every meeting, new possibilities seemed to emerge. For the first time in a long while, the CEO began imagining what it would be like to share the burden, to have someone by his side. Someone who could accelerate growth, open new doors, expand operations, and help turn years of hard-earned success into something even greater. As the months passed, the idea of a partnership stopped feeling like an option. It started feeling inevitable. Lawyers were brought in, ownership structures were discussed, documents were drafted, plans were finalized, and every conversation reinforced the feeling that they were about to build something extraordinary together. Then, the day finally arrived. The day everything would become official. The paperwork was complete. The signatures were in place. The excitement was real. The future looked brighter than ever. Then the two men stood up, looked each other in the eye, and shook hands. It was a simple gesture. One that lasted only a few seconds, but it carried decades of hard work, trust, sacrifice, and ambition. In that moment, the CEO believed he was making one of the best decisions of his life. He believed he had found the perfect partner, the man who would help protect everything he had built. The man who would help take the company to the next level. The man who would help turn a successful business into an empire. But what he didn't know was that this handshake wasn't the beginning of an extraordinary partnership. It was the beginning of the end. Because while the CEO saw a partnership, the other man saw an opportunity, and very soon that difference would change everything. But before we continue, I want to ask you something. Would you ever go into business with someone based on trust alone? Or do you believe every partnership needs clear rules and protections in place, even when friendship is involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about business, success, power, and the decisions that can change a person's destiny, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and allows more people to discover stories like this. Now let's get back to the story, because the first signs that something was wrong were already beginning to appear. If there's one thing almost every victim of a major betrayal has in common, it's this. When the first warning signs appear, they almost never look dangerous. In fact, they usually seem too small to matter, and that's exactly how this story began. For the first few months, the partnership looked like a massive success. The numbers were strong. The market responded positively. Clients were excited. New projects were being announced. New opportunities seemed to appear every week. From the outside, everything suggested that the CEO had made one of the smartest decisions of his career. And for a while, he believed it too. After all, the results seemed to confirm it. The company was growing. Operations felt stronger, and for the first time in years, he no longer felt like he was carrying the entire weight of the business on his shoulders. But while everyone was celebrating the success, something was quietly changing behind the scenes. Something small, almost invisible, something that at the time didn't appear threatening at all. It started with little things: a meeting cancelled without notice, a conversation with a client that had never been mentioned, an operational decision made without consultation. Individually, none of it seemed serious. Companies grow, processes evolve. Business partners don't always agree on everything. It was normal for there to be adjustments. At least that's how the CEO saw it. There was always a reasonable explanation, always a logical justification, and perhaps that was his first mistake. Because when we deeply trust someone, our instinct is to search for reasons to believe them, not reasons to question them. As the months passed, however, the incidents kept happening, and the pattern became harder to ignore. One day, during a casual conversation with an important client, the CEO heard something that immediately caught his attention. The client mentioned a future strategy for the company, a strategy the CEO had never discussed with anyone. For a moment, he assumed there had been a misunderstanding, but there hadn't. The client genuinely believed the decision had already been made, and the information had come directly from his business partner. The feeling was unsettling. But once again, he chose to let it go. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an early-stage idea. Maybe there had simply been a communication issue. Those explanations were easier to accept, much easier. But the warning signs kept coming. The partner began building increasingly close relationships with the company's most valuable clients. At first, that seemed like a good thing. A strong partner should strengthen client relationships, open doors, create opportunities, help the business grow. The problem wasn't what he was doing, it was how he was doing it. Little by little, clients started contacting him directly. Important decisions started flowing through him. Major negotiations began revolving around him. And without realizing it, the CEO was slowly being pushed out of conversations that should have included him, not completely, just enough to create a pattern that became more obvious with each passing week. At the same time, other changes were happening inside the company. The partner began attending strategic meetings without notifying anyone beforehand. He made decisions in departments that weren't under his authority. He launched initiatives without consulting key people involved, and whenever someone questioned him, the response was always ready, quick, convincing, carefully crafted. I'm just trying to move things forward. I didn't want us to miss the opportunity. It was a simple decision. It was practically already done. The explanations sounded reasonable, and that's exactly what made them dangerous, because they didn't create conflict, they didn't trigger confrontation, they simply created tiny cracks. Cracks so small that nobody realized how serious they were becoming. But the CEO was starting to feel something he couldn't quite explain. Not certainty, not an accusation, just a feeling. A quiet voice telling him something wasn't right. It surfaced. Every time he discovered a conversation he hadn't known about. Every time he learned about a decision he hadn't been included in. Every time he noticed that certain people inside the company seemed to answer more to his partner than to the leadership structure itself. But there was a problem. Instinct isn't proof. A feeling isn't evidence. And he was a rational businessman, someone who made decisions based on facts. So every time that uneasy feeling appeared, he pushed it aside. He told himself he was overthinking, that he was being overly cautious, that maybe he simply wasn't used to sharing responsibility after leading the company alone for so many years. But the feeling never disappeared. If anything, it became stronger, because while he was trying to ignore the warning signs, the other man kept moving forward, quietly, patiently, with a level of precision that nobody noticed, not the employees, not the clients, not the investors, and certainly not the man who believed he had found the perfect partner. What he couldn't see yet was that these weren't isolated incidents. They were pieces of something much larger, pieces of a plan being built right in front of him. A plan moving forward without urgency, without attracting attention, without raising suspicion. Because the most dangerous betrayals don't happen all at once. They happen one small step at a time until the day it's too late to stop the consequences. And that day was approaching much faster than he realized. There comes a moment in every betrayal when it stops being a possibility and becomes a plan. No one knows exactly when that moment happened. Not even the CEO would ever figure it out. Maybe it was when the partner realized how valuable the company had become. Maybe it was when he saw the size of the contracts. Maybe it was when he understood that building something this successful on his own would take decades. Or maybe there were never good intentions to begin with. No one could say for sure, but one thing was certain. While one man was working to strengthen the company, the other was quietly building something entirely different. In the shadows, out of sight, without attracting attention, without raising suspicion. Because the most dangerous plans are rarely rushed. They are built patiently, carefully. And this man seemed to have plenty of patience. Little by little, he began creating his own network of influence. Nothing that looked suspicious, nothing that seemed alarming. At least not at first. Everything happened gradually, naturally, almost invisibly. First came the casual conversations, business lunches, informal meetings, phone calls after hours, appointments that looked like routine networking, but in reality, they served a much bigger purpose. He was strengthening personal relationships with the company's most valuable clients, not simply as a representative of the business, but as someone positioning himself to become indispensable. Over time, clients began trusting him directly. They started calling him before calling the company. They started associating successful outcomes with his involvement, and without realizing it, the organization was becoming increasingly dependent on a man with ambitions of his own. But that was only one piece of the puzzle. At the same time, something even more concerning began happening. Confidential information started appearing in places it never should have. Strategies carefully developed inside the company seemed to lose their effectiveness before they were even implemented. Plans that had taken months to prepare suddenly failed. To create the competitive advantage they were supposed to deliver. Innovative ideas mysteriously appeared in the hands of competitors, and valuable opportunities began slipping away. At first, nobody understood why. Markets are competitive. Information travels. Coincidences happen. There was always an explanation. At least that's what everyone told themselves. But as the incidents continued, ignoring the pattern became increasingly difficult. Competitors were responding to proposals with an almost unsettling level of accuracy. Strategic initiatives seemed to be known by people who should never have had access to them. Important negotiations collapsed in ways that felt strange, too strange. Something wasn't adding up, and the CEO started noticing it. At first, he tried to rationalize everything. He convinced himself it was simply a series of unfortunate coincidences. But that feeling kept coming back. The same uncomfortable feeling, the same quiet voice that had been growing louder for months. Now it was impossible to ignore. So he decided to investigate. Quietly, without accusations, without drama, without creating unnecessary conflict. He reviewed internal processes, spoke with managers, analyzed documents, looked for weaknesses, tried to trace the source of the leaks, but he ran into a problem. The evidence wasn't there. There were signs, plenty of signs, but no proof, nothing concrete. Nothing definitive, nothing strong enough to accuse someone without risking a terrible mistake. And that left him trapped in a dangerous position, because when you feel that something is wrong but can't prove it, you hesitate, and hesitation creates time. Time that dishonest people know how to use. That's exactly what happened. While the CEO searched for answers, his partner kept moving forward, kept expanding his influence, kept strengthening relationships, kept gathering information, kept learning everything he could about the business. The clients, the suppliers, the internal systems, the company's strengths, and more importantly, its weaknesses. Every meeting gave him new knowledge. Every conversation created new opportunities. Every piece of information became another piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle nobody could see in its entirety, not even the man being betrayed. But the truth was becoming painfully simple. The partner no longer thought like a partner. He no longer acted like a partner. He no longer viewed the future of the company the same way. Because somewhere along the line, ambition had become stronger than loyalty. And when that happens, trust becomes a weapon. Access becomes an advantage, and friendship becomes something to exploit. What the CEO still didn't understand was that his partner was preparing for a very specific moment. The moment he would no longer need the partnership. The moment he could walk away, taking something far more valuable than money with him. Knowledge, relationships, clients, strategies, years of insight gained inside the company that welcomed him. Inside the company that trusted him. Inside the company he was quietly helping destroy from within. And when that moment finally arrived, the damage would be far greater than anyone could imagine, because the real betrayal had not yet been exposed. But it was getting dangerously close to stepping out of the shadows. Every betrayal has an inevitable moment, the moment it stops being a suspicion and becomes a certainty. For months, the CEO had lived with questions, small doubts, uncomfortable feelings he couldn't fully explain. Pieces of a puzzle that never seemed to fit together. But on that day, everything changed, and it changed in the most unexpected way possible. It wasn't an audit. It wasn't an internal investigation. It wasn't a report from lawyers or consultants. It was a phone call, a simple phone call, one that began like any other, and ended by destroying everything he thought he knew. On the other end of the line was an old client, one of the company's oldest, someone who had been there since the early days, someone who had witnessed the struggle, the sacrifices and the growth, someone who understood exactly how much this business meant to him. The client sounded uneasy. There was hesitation in his voice, the kind of hesitation that comes when someone knows they're about to deliver news that will change everything. For the first few moments, the conversation remained casual. Market updates, industry talk, business as usual. Then came a pause, an uncomfortable silence, the kind that always seems to arrive right before bad news, and then came the words the CEO would never forget. The client revealed that he had recently been approached by the partner. At first, nothing about that seemed unusual. After all, the partner regularly spoke with clients. That was part of his role. But the reason for the contact was different, very different. The partner wasn't representing their company. He wasn't negotiating on behalf of the partnership. He wasn't working to strengthen the business they had built together. He was offering something else, a new company, his own company, a direct competitor. For a few seconds, the CEO thought he had misunderstood. There had to be an explanation, a misunderstanding, some missing piece of context, something that would make it all make sense. But as the client continued talking, the doubts began to disappear. And reality began to emerge. Cold, brutal, impossible to ignore. His partner had built a parallel operation, in secret, without disclosure, without transparency, without any intention of acting in good faith. But the existence of the company, wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how it had been built. The clients, the contacts, the strategies, the relationships, all of it had come from the business they had built together. All of it had been developed using the resources of the partnership. All of it had been fueled by the trust he had freely given. And now it was being used against him. The call lasted less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes felt like an eternity, because with every new detail, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The secret meetings, the decisions made without consultation. The side conversations, the clients who had started acting differently, the information leaks, the lost opportunities. The signs had been there all along, every single one of them. Now, for the first time, they finally made sense. It was like staring at an incomplete puzzle for months and suddenly finding the missing centerpiece. Everything connected, everything became clear, everything became impossible to deny. When the call ended, he didn't move. The phone was still in his hand, his eyes fixed on nothing, trying to process what he had just heard, because in that moment, he wasn't simply discovering a competitor. He was discovering a betrayal that had been built slowly, planned carefully, executed right in front of him without him ever realizing it. And the pain wasn't just financial. It wasn't even primarily financial. It was personal, because there was something much harder to accept. The man responsible wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a rival. He wasn't someone who had always stood against him. It was the man who had shaken his hand, the man who sat across from him in meetings, the man who shared his table, the man who listened to his plans, learned his strategies, heard his fears, understood his weaknesses, and then used all of that knowledge as a weapon. In that instant, a devastating truth became impossible to ignore. Every act of loyalty now felt suspicious. Every friendly conversation felt calculated. Every promise felt rehearsed. Everything that once looked like partnership suddenly took on a darker meaning. And perhaps that was the most painful realization of all. The trust hadn't been broken by accident. It had been exploited, used, manipulated, turned into a tool. The handshake that had once symbolized opportunity now meant something entirely different. It no longer represented growth or partnership or a new chapter. It marked the exact moment he had given access to the one person capable of destroying him from the inside, and now the consequences were staring him in the face. Real, measurable, impossible to ignore. Clients were already being approached. Relationships had already been compromised. Confidential information had already been used. The competing company was already operating. And the most terrifying part? This hadn't started weeks ago. It hadn't even started months ago. It had been unfolding for a very long time. While he believed he was strengthening a partnership, his partner was preparing an exit, and now there were no more doubts, no more explanations, no more room for trust. The battle he never imagined he would have to fight was about to begin, and this time the enemy knew every detail of his empire. There's a part of betrayal that almost nobody talks about. Everyone talks about the discovery, the shock, the anger, the confrontation. But the real battle begins afterward, when reality finally settles in, when the consequences stop being a threat and become part of everyday life, and that's exactly what happened. The weeks that followed were, without question, the hardest of the CEO's entire career. Over the years, he had survived economic downturns, market disruptions, aggressive competitors, moments when the company had been pushed to its limits. But none of that compared to this. Because this time, the attack hadn't come from the outside. It had come from within, from someone who knew every corner of the business, every strength, every weakness, every relationship built over decades, and that made the damage far more devastating. The first priority was containing the fallout. Clients, who were being approached by the competing company, had to be contacted immediately. Meetings were scheduled, explanations were given. Relationships that had taken years to build now had to be defended in a matter of days. Some clients understood. They recognized who had earned their trust from the beginning. They recognized who had always shown up. And they chose to stay. But not everyone made that choice. Some had already committed elsewhere. Some believed the former partner's promises. Others simply wanted to avoid becoming caught in the middle of a conflict, and when they left, they took more than revenue with them. They took opportunities, projects, momentum. Every lost client represented far more than a contract. It represented years of trust, years of effort, years of shared history, and the losses didn't stop there. Deals that were close to closing suddenly collapsed. Strategic partners became cautious. Projects that depended on certain relationships disappeared overnight. In some cases, the former partner's influence had become so extensive that entire initiatives were no longer viable. What had once looked like a strong, stable structure now needed to be rebuilt almost from scratch. And rebuilding is always harder than building, because you're not just creating something new, you're repairing what was broken. That became the challenge. Processes had to be redesigned, teams had to be reorganized, responsibilities had to be reassigned. Security measures were strengthened. Governance systems were overhauled, and the CEO realized he wasn't simply trying to win back clients. He was rebuilding the entire foundation of trust inside the company. The financial impact was severe, not enough to destroy the business, but enough to erase years of progress. Revenue declined, profit margins shrank, investments were postponed, expansion plans were put on hold, promising projects never moved forward. The company was still standing, but it had been deeply wounded, and the scars would remain visible for a long time. Yet the financial loss wasn't what bothered him most, not even close, because there was another loss, one that couldn't be measured, one that never appeared in reports, never showed up on financial statements, could never be calculated by consultants or accountants. It was internal, silent, deep. It was the loss of trust. In the months that followed, he realized something inside him had changed, permanently. For the first time in his life, he found himself questioning people he would once have welcomed without hesitation. New opportunities were examined with almost obsessive caution. Potential partners were observed for months before being trusted with meaningful responsibility. Every new business relationship had to pass through barriers that had never existed before. And he knew exactly why. The betrayal had left a mark, because when a stranger disappoints you, the pain has limits. But when someone you've trusted deeply uses that trust for their own benefit, the impact is far greater. You stop questioning only them. You start questioning yourself. How did I miss the signs? How did I not see what now seems obvious? How did I allow someone to get that close? Those questions followed him everywhere, in meetings, on flights, during negotiations, even in moments of complete silence. For a long time, he didn't just trust other people less. He trusted himself less, and perhaps that was the cruelest consequence of all. Not the lost contracts, not the stolen clients, not the millions in missed revenue, but the quiet transformation of a man who had built his entire career on strong relationships, a man who believed in people, a man who saw trust as one of the most powerful assets in business. Now that trust came with hesitation, with caution, with doubt. Every handshake carried an unspoken question. Every new partnership triggered a silent concern. Every promise had to be verified, and even though the company was slowly recovering, he knew some losses would never be fully reversed, because money can be earned back, clients can return, businesses can be rebuilt. But trust shattered by someone who knew your dreams, your plans, and your vulnerabilities leave scars that are far harder to erase. And from that pain came the most valuable lesson of his entire journey, a lesson that would forever change the way he viewed business, leadership, and the people he chose to stand beside. Time has a strange way of changing things. What once feels like a wound that will never heal eventually becomes a scar. The pain never disappears completely, but it stops controlling your life, and that's exactly what happened. The years passed. The company survived. It kept fighting, kept moving forward, not in the way he had imagined before the betrayal, not at the pace it could have achieved, and certainly not without consequences, but it endured, and in itself that was a victory. Slowly, clients returned, new opportunities emerged, new contracts were signed. The business found its balance again, maybe smaller than it could have been, maybe different from what he once envisioned, but still strong enough to remain relevant, still strong enough to keep writing its story. And it was during that period that something changed inside him. For the first time in years, he was able to look back without feeling only anger, without feeling only resentment, without reliving the weight of the betrayal. He was finally able to see everything clearly, the kind of clarity that only time can provide. And from that clarity came lessons he would never forget. The first lesson was about warning signs. Because when he looked back, he realized something uncomfortable. The signs had always been there, from the very beginning. Small, subtle, easy to dismiss, but they were there. The secret meetings, the incomplete information, the decisions made without alignment. The explanations that came a little too quickly, the moments that felt off but were ignored, all of it appeared long before the betrayal was exposed. The problem wasn't that the signs were missing. The problem was that he chose not to see them. Not because he was naive, not because he was incompetent, but because he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe he had finally found the right partner. He wanted to believe this partnership would be different. He wanted to believe that after years of struggle, he had finally found someone who shared the same values. And sometimes, the desire to believe is stronger than the willingness to face reality. That became his first great lesson. Never ignore what your instincts keep trying to tell you, because small warning signs often point to much bigger problems. The second lesson was even deeper. The difference between charisma and character. For a long time he confused the two. Now he understood why. His former partner had charisma in abundance. He knew how to talk, how to persuade, how to build connections almost instantly. He knew exactly how to make people feel comfortable around him, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately command attention. But time revealed something important. Charisma opens doors. Character determines what happens after you walk through them. And those are two very different things. His partner knew how to earn trust, but he didn't know how to honor it. He knew how to build relationships, but not how to respect them. He knew how to appear loyal, but not how to be loyal. And that's when the CEO understood a truth he would carry for the rest of his life. Character doesn't reveal itself in speeches or presentations or promises. Character reveals itself when nobody is watching, when someone has the opportunity to do the wrong thing, when personal interests collide with commitments, when a person must choose between integrity and advantage, and when that moment arrived, his former partner failed the test completely. But perhaps the third lesson was the most valuable of all, because it changed the way he approached business forever. He learned that trust matters. In fact, it's essential. No company grows without trust. No team thrives without trust. No partnership survives without trust. But trust alone is not enough. Systems matter. Structures matter, and they matter a lot. Clear contracts defined, responsibilities, transparent processes protective, safeguards, rules that continue working even when people fail. For years, he had viewed those things as formalities. Now, he saw them as protection, not because everyone is dishonest, but because even honest people can change. Ambitions change, circumstances change, interests change, and when they do, strong structures protect everyone involved. They protect relationships. They protect businesses. They protect legacies built over decades. Most importantly, they reduce the opportunities for trust to be exploited. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life, and it was because of that lesson that he managed to rebuild more slowly, more carefully, more selectively, but also much wiser. Because in the end, he realized something that most entrepreneurs only learn after many years. The greatest lessons rarely come from success. Success builds confidence, failure builds wisdom. It's the setbacks that reveal our weaknesses, the losses that force us to grow, and the betrayals that show us who we really are when everything starts falling apart. That's how he discovered not only the character of the people around him, but his own. He discovered his ability to endure, to rebuild, to keep moving forward, even after losing so much. And perhaps that's the real message of this story. Not every defeat is the end. Not every betrayal destroys you forever. Sometimes It simply reveals what you still need to learn. Now I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever trusted the wrong person? In business? In friendship? Or even within your own family? How did you deal with it? Share your experience in the comments below. Stories like yours remind people that they're not alone. And if this story made you think, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps the channel reach more people and allows us to keep bringing you stories like this. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. And remember, in business, strategy can create growth, capital can create expansion, but choosing the right people to stand beside you will always be one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. See you in the next video.